Peter, you wrote Carter's obituary in the New York Times, where you write, quote, Mr. Carter's presidency is now treated more kindly by many historians. Reassessment fueled not just by what he did in office, but what he did after leaving office. His post-presidential legacy is truly unmatched. How did he redefine the years after the Oval in his own terms?
Yeah, I mean, no question about that. Look, remember, he was in the White House for just 4 years, but he was out of the White House for more than 40 years afterwards, a time that he used to extend and build on the legacy of his time in office, but also to go beyond it, right? He often said that he could get some things done as a former president that he couldn't get done as president. His humanitarian work, his efforts to fight disease, his efforts to bring peace in various parts of the world really brought his stature to a new high, and in fact earned him the Nobel Peace Prize in 2002. So a lot of people who may not remember his presidency, which was at this point, of course, a number of years back, do remember him as a former president. And so you see in polls, for instance, a poll by Gallup last year asked Americans, well, do you approve of the way Carter handled his presidency? 57% said yes last year. That's 20% more, roughly, than felt that way at the time of his presidency, which I think reflects upon people's views of him and the way he has conducted himself, the way he has dedicated, his life and post-presidency to greater causes than just simply cashing in or making money like other former politicians.
And Eleanor, this is a guy who knew how to use a hammer and a drill. You say you learned the most about Carter when you built houses with him, volunteering alongside him one summer at Habitat for Humanity. Talk to us about that experience and how you see his life of public service.
Right. Well, we stayed in the dorms at Agnes Scott College because it was an Atlanta housing project, and the bus would take everybody out to the work site to arrive at 7 a.m. And you look out the window and there was Carter jogging along. Now, he left the White House at age 56. He was still a pretty young man. And so he dreamt big. He initially envisioned the Carter Center as a mini Camp David, where he would bring warring parties together and do what he did best, which was his diplomatic achievement of bringing peace between Israel and Egypt. That evolved into the Carter Center, which does more than peacemaking, gets into global health and social inequality and lots of good things. But when Carter was working, he was a serious craftsman. He was a good carpenter, by the way. And the people who came to Habitat for Humanity were almost like a Jimmy Carter cult. And that began soon after he left the White House, actually. He was maligned in general by the Democratic Party and certainly the Republicans, but there was always a core of people, the Peanut Brigade, you might call them. And he didn't want to waste time taking pictures with anybody. So everybody would go to the work site and 40 minutes would be set aside in the middle of the day and a line would form and he would sign J. Carter, J. Carter. He wouldn't even look up. Despite that big smile, he wasn't all that congenial because he was too busy working all the time. And psychologically, his father and his 3 siblings all died in the prime of their life, really, because of pancreatic cancer. And his mother, though she lived into her 80s, also, there was the same disease that took her. Wow. So I always felt that he was a survivor in the family. He had to excel for everybody. And he needed to make money. The peanut business was in disrepair after his 4 years in the White House. He wasn't going to make speeches for money in front of corporations, and I don't think they would have invited him. He was not a big friend of big business, and I don't think he ever picked up a golf club. So he chose to write 32 books and to do these good works. And he wanted his presidency to be reevaluated, and I think he's gotten his wish, and we'll hear more about that over the coming days and weeks.
He leaves behind all these books. He leaves behind literally thousands of houses he helped build with his own hands for people in need. He leaves behind his legacy of eradicating diseases. Peter, you also write about Carter's role in what's known as the President's Club, a group of men who have served as commander-in-chief, which at times was contentious. Quote, to many of his successors, he was a thorn in their side, always doing his own thing, even if it conflicted with official foreign policy, which he considered principled, they considered sanctimonious. While other former presidents generally held their tongues out of deference to the current occupant of the Oval Office, Mr. Carter rarely stood on ceremony. How did Carter view his place in that club, and how was that approach received by his successors like Clinton or Obama, members of his own party?
Yeah, he wasn't really keen on clubs, as one of his biographers put it, and I think that's a good way to put it. He pursued what he considered to be the right thing to do, regardless if it ruffled feathers. And he wasn't, as Eleanor just said, you know, he wasn't maybe the most congenial person in the world at all times, and he didn't really too much care if the person in the White House disapproved of what he was doing. That didn't mean he always freelanced without consulting. He did, but a lot of the times he would go further than the incumbent president wanted him to go. And that was true of Republicans and Democrats. As you mentioned, Bill Clinton often found that to be a little annoying when Jimmy Carter was in Haiti or North Korea or something like that. But he had a real feeling that his experience mattered, that he could accomplish something on the world stage that you can't do while in office. In fact, he even said that he thought at one point that his experience as a former president made him superior in some ways to the person who was actually sitting in office because of his experience, but the freedom that he had to operate. And people knew that when he came to town, when he was trying to work on something, whether it be a peace deal or monitoring elections or fighting disease, that he was doing it for what he thought was the right reasons, even if, again, it conflicted with official policy, that he wasn't out there for himself. So I think that got him a little bit of leeway, even when he did, leave a few nerves raw in the Oval Office.
Eleanor, a complicated presidency and a post-presidency that redefined life after the White House. As we've touched on, he was a peacemaker, a home builder, a disease fighter, elections monitor, and so much more. What was behind all that drive?
Why Not the Best, which was his first book. He went to the Naval Academy, and God, what was the name of the famous naval captain who said to Carter, how did you do? And Carter came in, I don't know, second, and he said, why not the best? And so he was such a striver, even in the White House when he would get his hair cut. He brought in a barber that could speak Spanish so he could work on his Spanish while he was getting his hair cut. And that was a controversial move because the same barber had been servicing presidents for years, and Carter upended that. He had little tags put on, or placards put on every tree on the White House grounds so that he could identify the foliage. I mean, he excelled at so many things. He never seemed to want to waste a single minute. And he was not a schmoozer, as Peter referred to. He didn't like to have members of Congress over and shoot the breeze over drinks. In fact, his White House was a teetotaler White House. And he didn't get along with the Democratic leaders as well as Ronald Reagan did, to be honest. So I think that was a failure and a misstep. But he did have big Democratic majorities when he first took office. And so he does have a lengthy list of accomplishments. But unfortunately, we often remember presidents for their biggest failures. And his big accomplishments should be right up there. The peace treaty, certainly, between Israel and Egypt, and his recognition of climate change and his attempts to wean us from oil. So he was a man ahead of his time in many ways, and I think you're going to see Carter acolytes really refuse the notion that he represents an era long gone. If we can't figure out how to get along in the future, so I think he's more of a man for all seasons. We could certainly use somebody like him again today. But he wasn't a big personality. He even banned "Hail to the Chief" playing when he first walked into a room. He later reversed that. He was so intent on carrying forward the humility that was a reaction to the excesses of the Watergate era, that he overdid it. And I think the country was looking for a bigger personality, and they got that with Reagan. It's a transition that's rather similar to today from Biden to Trump also.
Interesting. Oh, you both are such wells of knowledge. Thank you very much for sharing all of that with us about a truly one-of-a-kind kind of man.